Well, it's been reported that President Cyril Ramaphosa has completed his consultation with the ANC's alliance partners regarding a cabinet reshuffle after meetings with Cosatu and the South African Communist Party this weekend. ANC Secretary-General Fikile Mbalula last week told the media that although President Ramaphosa would use his prerogative in his cabinet reshuffle, he would consult with the governing party and its alliance partners before making the announcement. Now, the outcomes of the ANC's 55th National Conference that saw Ramaphosa re-elected as the party's president alongside the party's national executive appointments have also prompted questions with regard to who in the ANC and its new leadership could be appointed to cabinet. Now, Bernstein is executive director at the Centre for Development Enterprises, and she joins us now virtually to have a further discussion about these imminent developments. And I say imminent, and I've been saying all morning, Anne, that I'm using this very loosely because we've been anticipating this cabinet reshuffle for quite some time. But welcome to Morning Live.
Good morning. Thank you for inviting me. Great to be here.
It's an absolute pleasure. What should the criteria be for the president? We know that it is his prerogative to appoint to his cabinet whomsoever he wishes. But what should he actually be occupying his mind with in terms of these appointments, do you think?
The context within which this reshuffle takes place is that South Africa is in very deep trouble. We have a crisis on almost every front. And so what we need, but I'm afraid we're not going to get, is a cabinet that's fit for purpose, a cabinet that can deal with the crises we face and that can start turning things around in a decisive and persuasive way and as fast as possible. That would be my criteria.
So if we look around the people who are in cabinet at the moment, and one would imagine that many of them would be retained. And then, of course, there was a change of guard within the African National Congress itself after its 55th elective conference. What do you think is going to happen with regard to those people that the president would like to retain and the ones he needs to move out? Because some of those positions need to be filled as a necessity. The Secretary-General of the ANC now, Transport Minister Fikile Mbalula, he needs to vacate that space. We know that Ayandla Dlodlo has left her position. So there are positions, the Deputy President, David Mabuza, has tendered his resignation. So those are obvious. But quite apart from those where the president needs to make changes, there are also, in terms of what South Africans are saying, certain portfolios where the cabinet needs to be reshuffled so as to bring in expertise. But does the ANC have those? Does the president have those names at his disposal from the pool from which he needs to choose?
Well, I'm very concerned that the ANC talent pool is very shallow, and this cabinet reshuffle might be akin to rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. So I think far too much attention goes into the individuals often, and far too little attention to policy. So I don't really know how much this all matters. We're in a terrible situation. I think the ruling party has very few options. I'm not in the prediction business. I don't know which ministers are going to go. I certainly would like ministers who have allegations of corruption against them from the Zondo Commission to be out the cabinet. I think there are very few portfolios in this cabinet that are being managed well. I think the National Treasury is still a very impressive department, but then one starts to question where else we have real competence in this cabinet. But above that, I think we need a recognition that the country is really in crisis. And that requires people with the experience and the capacity to run departments that need fundamental reform. So South Africa spends far too much time, I think, often focusing on who will run the department, who will be the cabinet minister, admittedly important. We spend far too little time on the top officials in each department and where there is talent and where there isn't. So I think this could be a damn squib. Maybe we'll all be surprised and something dramatic will happen. But, you know, since the 9th of February, when we were told the country was in such a crisis that we needed a state of disaster declared on electricity and a new Minister of Electricity, this has taken an extraordinary long time. Now, we're going to have 5 ministers who have powers over power generation in South Africa. The new Minister of Electricity, the Minister of Public Enterprises, the Minister of Minerals and Energy, the Minister, which will probably be Mrs. Zuma, who is in charge of the state of disaster, and the Treasury. Does not augur well, especially at a time when the President told us in his State of the Nation speech that in a crisis, you need one line of command and one point of control. I don't see this exactly. So I am less enthusiastic and not very optimistic at all about any significant change coming from a cabinet reshuffle.
And I think those sentiments echoed by our viewers this morning, and in terms of the responses to our question of the day, the viewers essentially feel the same, like it's not going to make any change. But the reality is that the cabinet has to be reshuffled because, as I'd mentioned, there are vacancies, and of course there's a new position for a Minister of Electricity. So if we just hone in on that particular position, because one could argue that if anything, this is the one position where the president would perhaps have the leeway to free himself of the shackles, so to speak, to deal with this crisis that he has announced during the State of the Nation address, this disaster, and therefore appoint someone with the correct skill set and expertise to steer that particular issue. So do you think that he would actually exercise his prerogative in this regard?
Well, firstly, we have to say that if you're a minister in the presidency, you don't have a department, you don't have a budget. It's not crystal clear to me exactly what powers you will have. That's the first point. The second is in a context where there are lots of other ministers who have powers and who can interfere in the whole vital question of electricity and power generation. I'm not sure exactly how this will operate. So I don't really know. Perhaps he'll move somebody from infrastructure, where we have been singularly unsuccessful. So I don't quite know. As I said, I think this is in many respects a very strange conversation to be having. I can't quite work out, other than the president has a political problem between the Minister of Public Enterprises and the Minister of Minerals and Energy, exactly why we need an additional minister. And as I've said, what powers will they have when they don't have a budget, they don't have a department, and they're competing with others who do? So this is a tricky appointment. Not sure why we need it.
So again, and the president has been criticized time and time again for being indecisive and perhaps not being strong enough when it comes to issues such as the one you've just outlined, because many people feel that, you know, he is trying to manage this situation between the two ministries, Mineral Resources and Energy, and the Department of Public Enterprises, and now he goes and finds a third way, so to speak, to deal with this particular matter. But if the president...
And the fourth way, because we're going to have a state of disaster with a different minister in charge.
Absolutely.
With enormous powers.
Absolutely. And all the while, there is still no clarity as to how we're going to work our way out of this quagmire. And you look at the earlier point that you also made, Anne, about the talent pool within the African National Congress. But it's not just about the talent pool, is it? Because you also have the issue of the president who has to navigate this very slippery terrain within the African National Congress and, of course, its alliance partners as well. The president has to satisfy all those in that constituency and also the external constituencies that exist. And he has to do that with a cloud hanging over his own head regarding Phala Phala. So now you talk about the moral authority to say to someone, as you were pointing out, the Zondo Commission had actually implicated quite a few of the ANC leadership members. But on what authority does the president say to them, I cannot appoint you to my cabinet because your name appears in the state capture inquiry report and he has this Phala Phala cloud hanging over his head?
Well, let's start with some key principles. In a democracy, we elect people to Parliament, and Parliament then elects the president of the country. And the president of the country should lead. He should make decisions that are in the best interests of South Africa. That doesn't mean you do this devoid of party politics, but you need to make decisions that are in the national interest. Now, we have a cabinet where people have openly defied the president and he has not said anything and he's left them in the cabinet. I think that what South Africa needs now is a president who says, I'm in charge here and we're in a crisis and this is what I'm going to do in order to have a team around me who have the competence, the expertise to turn large systems around and who are committed to my reform project. So competence and commitment are required. I'm not very optimistic that this is going to happen.
So when you speak of people who have openly defied the president, again, can he afford? We know, for example, Minister Lindiwe Sisulu openly defied the president. We know that Minister Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma also, openly defied the president, just to name but two. So can he afford to leave them out of his cabinet and still have stability within his party? And we know this president, like those before him, have said that the ANC comes first. So would he really be as bold as to do something like that?
Well, Sakina, what I'm saying is, I think the likelihood is not, but we need to distinguish between what the country needs. What the country needs is a government that can get us out of the very deep holes that we are digging. And they are enormous, and they are multiple, and our problems are accelerating. That is what should be forefront in the president's mind. Now, that's what I mean when I say the national interest should prevail and not the ANC unity. So that's my view. Now, clearly you need a game plan for how to do this, but we haven't seen this from this president. Is he going to give Mrs. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma the enormous powers contained in the Disaster Management Act, his enemy? Will he do that? Why? She didn't do a very good job last time during COVID. This is a control minister, a minister who does not believe, who thinks she knows best for South Africa. So that's a big question. Will he get rid of Lindiwe Sisulu? But more important than that, will he put in people who actually can do the job? And I think we're seeing indecision so far on the most important issue facing the country, which is power, electricity and power. Our economy is dead if we do not get an adequate supply of electricity. And it must be remembered that I don't think people change their stripes. The leopard doesn't change its spots. This is a president who failed to stand up when a cabinet minister described the former CEO of Eskom as a traitor, the president was silent. So I am not optimistic that we're going to get the kind of decisions and the kind of people that the country needs now.
So, all in all, from everything that you've just said, there's obviously a lot going on here, Anne. But with all of that said, can we really, as a country, expect the same people, the same leadership, the same government? And when I say government, I don't only refer to the ANC, but everybody who sits in a position of leadership, be it in parliament, be it in the provincial legislatures, be it at a local municipal level. The same people who have brought us to this brink as a nation, can we really expect them to turn the ship around? Is that really, something that is logical?
Well, not in my view. This is a party that has given Johannesburg a mayor who represents, I don't even know, less than 1% of the electorate in Johannesburg because they couldn't decide on what to do and couldn't make a deal. So I am extremely pessimistic about this government's capacity to turn South Africa around. I wish I weren't, but I think that is the reality of where we sit, and I don't think a cabinet reshuffle is going to hold much hope for a better situation. I hope I'm wrong, but unless we suddenly get a much bolder, much stronger president who puts the interests of the country at the forefront, I think South Africans are going to be disappointed.
Well, it seems as though it doesn't really matter what the president does. With the same crop of people, we are most likely to have the same sort of outcomes once more. But isn't it a question of a more deeper conversation that South Africans need to have, not just about what is going on with the cabinet reshuffle, but about all our systems, including electoral reform? Because what we've seen is that oversight, even in Parliament, and this came out in the Zondo Commission as well, it really isn't a system that allows for a great accountability, because even if you disagree with a bill or, whatever law is trying to be promulgated, there's very little you can do because it's a numbers game in Parliament, for example. So shouldn't we be thinking a lot further as a nation about everything in this country, including our constitution, to try and fix what is wrong?
I agree that there's an enormously long list of challenges that South Africa has to deal with and fix. But when you're in a crisis, when you don't have water and you don't have power, and we have crime going up at the rate that it is, and we don't have investment and we don't have jobs, I think it's really important that all of us and the leadership in the country define our priorities and focus on those. So between now and the next election, I think they're very clear priorities. They are power, logistics, and crime. Security for all of us as individuals, but security for economic growth to take place and infrastructure to be maintained or rebuilt. And so priorities are absolutely essential, and we need competent, experienced leaders in those key places. So I would be firing a number of ministers if I were in control, and I would be looking to the wider South African population to see where I can find talent who could help South Africa out of our terrible situation today. However, I fear that is not what's going to happen, and that party politics in its very narrow sense will prevail over what South Africa really needs if we are to have a chance in 2023 and into 2024 of moving away from deepening crisis and despair and poverty for millions and millions of people.
And we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much. And Bernstein is Executive Director, Center for Development Enterprises, discussing the type of executive that the country needs from government leaders ahead of an expected cabinet reshuffle.